Hey guys, Navin out on No Limit Hold'em. Today we're going to be talking about hand reading. It's one of the most fundamental and necessary skills in No Limit Hold'em. So first let's talk about what hand reading is not. Hand reading is not a way to put your opponent on ace, king, or a flush draw every time they play a pot against you. And it's important to remember that your opponent does not always have a flush draw, nor does your opponent have ace, king, just because anytime he does have ace king he's going to raise. That doesn't mean that every time he raises he has ace king. This is not an intro to soul reading, and we're not going to learn to put our opponent on a hand, but rather we're going to be talking about putting our opponents on ranges. So when we're talking about hand reading, we have to start with a few assumptions, and there's different ways to go about this, and it can be confusing to figure out which way to even try to start out with hand reading, because you're going to start with a big bunch of hands and you're going to gradually start taking hands away as those hands stop making sense, right? Like as your opponent, every time your opponent acts in a way that he could not or probably wouldn't do with whatever hand, then you remove that hand from his range. But we have to start with assumptions about his range. So we can look at it like this. We can say, what should villain do? We can have a reasonable strategy laid out for our opponent and assume that they're going to be playing reasonably. Or we can try to make some Bayesian inferences. We can think that this is what the player pool does, and then you can kind of look at what the player pool, what most of the players in the player pool that you play in, how they play, what ranges they tend to use, and you can modify that a little bit at a time as you see new information coming in based on how often your opponent, open limps or 3-bets or V-pips, voluntarily puts money in the pot. So you can look at the player pool, what history you've seen from that opponent, or another way to do it is to try to kind of stereotype, like look at your opponent, make some player pool assumptions, and kind of modify that by whatever type of opponent your opponent tends to play like, because there are kind of these archetypes. There's people that are very loose and aggressive. There are players that play very tight and aggressive. And there's calling stations. And, there's some hybrids. There's some kind of in between. But I find that the latter actually does tend to work pretty well. Is if you just kind of assume that your opponent is playing a, lag style for whatever stake that you're playing, or a tag style, or he's just a calling station. You can make some pretty effective assumptions based on just what the player pool is and your opponent's archetype, like what kind of player they play most like, and then you can adjust that a little bit at a time as you see new information coming in. So basically, modern hand reading, the idea is to use deductive reasoning to eliminate hands from your opponent's range as those hands should not be in the opponent's range based on whatever actions they've taken throughout the hand at any given decision point. So, at the beginning, before your opponent even looks at his cards, he's got a range of any 2 cards, right? He can have 100% of all hands. But once he looks at his cards and acts on them, from the very first action, we're going to start weighting his range away from certain holdings and towards certain other holdings. Some holdings can be completely eliminated. If we know that our opponent is raising a range of 15% and he's open limping a range of 10%, and we see him open limp from middle position, he probably doesn't have ace queen, right? Because that would be in his raising range. Or conversely, if he's V-pipping 20%, say 25%, and he's open limping 10%, open raising 15%, when he comes into the pot for a limp, did I just say that? Or for a raise, then we can probably discount hands like 9-8 suited. We can wait away from them without completely eliminating them, just because we know that he does like to limp hands, and a player that does limp some hands is going to usually like to limp suited connectors and small pocket pairs. So we don't have to worry when this guy comes in for a raise if he limps half of his opening range. If he comes in for a raise on and then sees a flop of like 7-3-2 rainbow, you probably don't have to worry so much about sets. He probably doesn't have pocket twos in his range. What I say, 7.62, probably doesn't have sixes, may or may not have sevens, but we definitely don't have to worry so much about sets if we have, I don't know, like pocket tens or something like that. So that's the idea, is that we're going to start with any two cards, and then every time your opponent acts on his hand, we're going to eliminate a good chunk of hands from his possible range, so that as the hand progresses, and as we get closer and closer to the river, which is where the big money happens, right? Like, big money gets piled in on later streets. The more times your opponent's acted on their hand, the tighter their range becomes, and the better your decision-making process can become. Now let's be aware of the Princess Bride paradox. So a lot of players have asked me, I've heard this, I don't know, countless times, what if you're playing against an opponent who's so bad that you have no idea what they're doing, because how can you know what they're doing if they don't know what they're doing? And what about players that are so bad you can't even read them? And really, what stops a good player from playing a very unpredictable style in order to make it very difficult or impossible to read your range? And should I consider doing that myself? Should I start leveling and making loss leader plays to be less predictable? So the Princess Bride paradox, I'm naming this. If you've not seen the movie, you can go to that https://YouTube thing right there, and it'll take you to the scene that I'm referring to. There's the Sicilian and our hero, and they're playing a game of death where the guy allegedly has put poison in one cup but not the other, and the Sicilian's trying to decide whether he should drink from this cup or that cup, and he says, something along the lines of, well, surely I can't drink out of that cup, but you would have known that I would know that, so I can't drink out of this cup, and because you know that I'm a smart guy and I would have known that you knew that I'd know that, and so on and so forth. And it's really, it reminds me a lot of players that are playing poker, kind of beginner or even medium level players that haven't quite come to grips with the idea of playing a balanced style or game theory optimized style, and they think that there's like some kind of guessing game, rock, paper, scissors thing going on. Don't do that, okay? Don't just avoid leveling beyond 2 or 3 levels, or you're just playing rock, paper, scissors. You're just playing the Princess Bride game. So yeah, if you haven't seen that, watch the clip. It'll all make sense. You'll get a laugh out of it. I'm sure you've heard players say things like this, there's the one podcast I listened to. It was terrible. There's a coach is on there, and then a guy that wrote a book. The book was Post-Flop Poker, I believe. And they say things like this all the time, he bet very big, so, I thought that he probably did that because he would want to make it look like it was a bluff, so since I thought he thought I was good enough to recognize that big bet looked pretty bluffy, I assumed that it must be a value bet. Just stop it. That's insanity. There's no logic going on there. Your brain's not working right. Knock it off. The same thing is true of trying to play bad in order that your opponent can't read your hand, or worrying about your opponent playing poorly in a way that makes it impossible for you to read their hand. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. If your opponent doesn't play well, he's going or she's going to lose to you. That's what it means to not play well. If they weren't playing badly, they wouldn't be playing badly, right? I mean, it's real simple. The only thing you can do with hand reading is you can put your opponent in a situation. This is that scene, by the way. The only thing you can really do with hand reading is you can put your opponent in a situation where they have 3 choices, really. Choice number 1 would be they can play in a way that disguises their hand by way of losing money, by way of playing poorly. And if they're playing poorly, they're going to lose money. But yeah, you won't be able to read their hand, but you don't need to read their hand if they're playing poorly. Playing poorly, by definition, means losing money. If you're in the pot, who else are they going to be losing money to, right? So if they're playing so badly that you can't read their range, then they are, by definition, losing money to you. Plain and simple, right? And we get into all these ideas about taking loss leaders and Even who's the guy that writes the books with Mason? He came up with this idea that the metagame is trading small mistakes in exchange for bigger mistakes from your opponent. It's not true. It's not true. That's not what you do. You don't want to trade small mistakes in order to gather large mistakes. You want to avoid making mistakes. There is no such thing as a loss leader in game theory optimal play. You will never take an unprofitable line for deception value if you're playing a GTO strategy. There's just, I'm not going to get into it right here. I've got videos about it. But GTO does not include loss leaders. There's no reason to ever intentionally lose money on a play. There's way better things to do. You should not be thinking about tricking your opponent every time you play a hand. You should not be thinking about taking unpredictable lines to mix up your play. Just if you're worried about your opponent reading you, then you just need to balance your ranges. That's it. If you're balanced, you can tell your opponent what your strategy is, and they still can't beat you. They can't do anything to exploit you. You could tell them exactly, look, this is the range that I'm going to bet on this in this spot. And there's still nothing they can do. Let's say you've got an opponent who's got just a very pure bluff catcher range, and you are playing a very polarized range, but you're perfectly balanced. You've got the right ratio of bluffs to value, or value to bluff, relative to the bet sizing that you're using. And you say jam all in on the river for one pot size bet. You've got 2 value hands for every 1 bluff, and you tell your opponent your entire range. Like, anytime I get to this spot, I'm going to have these hands and these hands, and when I make this pot size jam. What are they going to do about it? They're going to either fold, in which case you capture the pot, or they're going to call, in which case you're going to capture the pot 2/3 of the time, but they will put in a whole nother pot size bet. It doesn't matter. You've made them indifferent between calling and folding. So you can tell them your entire strategy at that point, and they still can't do anything about it. So don't hide for the cops in the police station. There's a reason that they wouldn't think about you hiding in the police station. It's because it's stupid to hide in the police station. Don't hide in plain sight, because that's not hiding, right? So just get rid of the leveling idea. So the ability to effectively range your opponent is the ability to put your opponents in a situation where they have to choose from the following: either make costly errors and play poorly against you, or play reasonably and reveal information about the hands that they hold. That's it. There is a third option, but most of your opponents won't take it. In fact, nobody can actually play a GTO style. But there are basically two things that most of your opponents will have to decide between if you're hand reading very effectively. If you know exactly what hands they should be taking XYZ line with, or which hands that they ought to be acting in which ways with, and then they can either do that, and then you'll have an idea about what they're holding, or they cannot do that, and they'll dump off a bunch of money to you trying to trick you. That's it. Or they can play GTO, but who can do that? So what if our opponents are hand reading us? Should we play bad losing poker in order to make mistakes that make it hard for our opponents to read us? Or should we play a predictable but reasonable style, but then just gift them a bunch of useful information? Or should we take profitable lines with balanced ranges that try to maximize EV while spreading disinformation, or really limiting the amount of information your opponent can glean, and how effectively they're able to use that information against you? Of course, if our opponents are thinking at a certain level, we should be trying to be balanced. We should be looking for a GTO strategy. We should be trying to play as near equilibrium as possible, only deviating from that kind of approximation of GTO in order to exploit our opponent's leaks, or exploit whatever imbalances we notice in their game. If they're really bad, terrible players, we probably don't need to think too much about that. We can just take our exploitative approach and just, if they call too much, stop bluffing them. If they bluff too much, start calling them down light, that kind of thing. And if they're really paying attention and they're trying to get a line on us, a beat on us, then we should be balancing our lines. And that's really the heart of GTO. That's really what it means, is we're trying to play profitably in a way that our opponent can't know what to do against us, or can't exploit us. Here's an example. Villain's an internet reg. He's a loose, aggressive player. He 3-bets a polarized range when he's in position, pre-flop. You've seen him check back mid-pairs as pre-flop raiser, so you know that he's not c-betting all of his hits. He's probably c-betting a polarized range. You've seen him c-bet air, and you've seen him c-bet top pair, top kicker on King XX. So if you know that he's not c-betting all of his hits, like if he flops second pair or bottom pair, he might check that back, but if he hits really hard, he's going to c-bet when he's got a range advantage, or when he's got air, he's going to bluff c-bet when he's got a range advantage. You can start to make some assumptions about how he's going to play. So you open the cutoff with 2 jacks, and your opponent 3-bets from the button. You decide to call. Say you're 100 big blinds deep. The flop comes King 8-4, rainbow. You check, villain checks back. Okay, so the turn comes off the 2 of spades. What do we know about our opponent's range? At this point, what do we think? Okay, well, we know that he 3-bet us pre-flop, so he's either got one of his bluffing hands, and if we know something about his light 3-bet range, that's great. Like, we know what he's going to 3-bet for value. He's going to 3-bet like queens plus, maybe jacks plus, but we block jacks pretty hard. And then like maybe ace queen plus, like ace queen, ace king, and jacks plus or queens plus. He's going to probably 3-bet those for value. I mean, we know most 3-bet ranges, the value part of the ranges is going to look something like that for most players. And if we know he's polarized, then he's going to use some other hands for balance, some bluff, some lighter hands for 3-betting. A lot of players use suited connectors that aren't quite good enough to call with, and a lot of players like to use other weaker broadways like Jack 10. I don't really like that idea, but some players do it. And then some players like to use blockers like Ace X suited. So I think you can assume that your opponent's going to have a lot of his ace wheel suiteds, like Ace X suited, Ace 2 through Ace 5 suited. But, you know, if you've seen him call with Ace 5 suited in a spot like this before, you can discount that idea too. But what is really telling is when he checks this flop back. This is a flop that's going to hit his 3-bet range really hard. He's going to have top pair, top kicker. He might have king, queen. He will have aces. He'll have top set. He might have eights. But then he's going to have a lot of second pairs like jacks and queens, maybe tens. And he may have the suited connectors. He may have some hands like 5-4 suited, 8-7 suited, 9-8 suited, maybe some like 10-8 suited or even 9-8 offsuit. So when he checks this flop back, what does he not have? He doesn't have top pair, top kicker, and he doesn't have an overpair. He probably doesn't have a set because he's going to be expected to c-bet this flop with all of his air. And if he seems like he knows what he's doing and he seems like he's betting a polarized range, then we can probably guess that he doesn't have air and he doesn't have a big hand. So what's left? Well, like bottom pairs, but there's not very many bottom pairs. You could have ace 4 suited, 5-4 suited, 8-7 suited, or something like pocket tens, pocket jacks, pocket queens. It's taking a pot controlled line. Or if he likes to 3-bet the blocker hands, he might have some like king 7 suited, king 6 suited, king 9, king 10 offsuit type stuff. It depends a lot on his range that he 3-bets preflop. But the good thing is that the hands like pocket 10s and 8-7 suited are pretty much the same hand, right? Same with like pocket 10s or pocket 9s, if he 3-bets that. It's likely that he's got a hand that is that's got some showdown value that he's deciding to use as a bluff catcher. So if we have air, now we can like overbet the turn, overbet jam the river, and he can like never call us, right? And if we have a value hand, like if we have pocket queens here, or like, I don't know, king jack suited, then we can bet very precisely in order to get the maximum value. Like we could maybe make a pot size bet on the turn, knowing that he checked back flop, he's like never going to fold to a pot size bet on the turn. He's underwrecked his hand. He's given us incentive to bluff, so we can go big on the turn. But then he's probably going to fold a lot on the river if we barrel again, so then we can give him a price on the river, and we can really punish him for having revealed so much about his range to us because of our hand reading skills, right? So let's say we bet half the size of the pot, and I think that's probably about right with jacks. We We want to get value from 10s, from 9s if he has them, 8-7 suited, 5-4 suited. So we bet villain calls, and the river is the 10 of spades. What's your play here? So there's a lot of things that should come to mind when you're thinking about whether to bet that river or not. And I'm not even going to really talk about whether you should or should not bet the river. I think it's close, but I think we should be going for a bet fold, actually. Like bet half pot, fold to a raise. But you can't even start to think about those things if you're not thinking about what types of hands your opponent has in their range, how they're likely to play their range. The other option would be to check and call, by the way, but I like bet fold because checking and calling seems like it puts the same amount of money in a slightly worse fashion. But we'll get to that in another video, or probably watch the rest of my videos at some point. We've already gotten into it, probably both. But don't project your game onto other players. Don't think just because you would do this, they're going to do this. Try to use deductive reasoning to reduce possible hands from your opponent's range. Once they act in such a way that they would not act if they had aces, don't put aces back into the range on some later street when you're thinking what hands can beat me. Oh, aces can beat me. They must have aces. Don't always put your opponent on a flush draw. Don't always put them on ace-king offsuit or ace-king. They don't usually have ace-king, and they usually do not have a flush draw. You'd be very surprised. Get anything, poker stove, or what is the modern equivalent to poker stove? Use a solver. Like Flopzilla, that's a good example, or well, any solver, any software really, and just put in some ranges, and put some flops out that have two-tone hands, and see just how unlikely it is for your opponent to have a flush draw on a given board. I mean, give your opponent every suited combo along with some combos that make some sense, and then put a flop into the computer that has like 2 spades on it, and see how rare it is, even if your opponent plays every suited hand possible, for him to have a flush draw. They just don't usually have flush draws. Even if you have every suited combo possible, you know, there's 2 of that suit on the flop, so it's less likely they're in that suit, and there are 4 suits plus a bunch of other hands that aren't suited. It's very unlikely your opponent has a flush draw. I mean, just on the flop, when you're deciding about checking back or betting or calling or raising or whatever, on the flop, until you've gotten a lot of information throughout the play of the hand, you really can't just put your opponent on a flush draw, because the board is well, allowing for there to be the possibility that your opponent has a flush draw. Use deductive reasoning and inference to remove hands from your opponent's ranges, and then don't put them back in unless you realize you've made a mistake at some point. Add and subtract weight from the combos that your opponent can have, and use Bayesian inference to adjust your starting assumptions, meaning that as you see new information become or come to light, be willing to give up on the initial ideas that you had about whatever style you believed your opponent was playing if it turns out that you maybe aren't correct. But do it slowly, adjust slowly. You don't have to make binary adjustments. If you knew your opponent's strategy, you absolutely could make binary adjustments, but you don't have to do it that way. You can kind of ease into your adjustments. Do not worry about your opponent being too bad for you to read him. It's so silly. You know, it's like you'd never hear anybody say anything even remotely close to this in any other game. Like, how do I beat somebody at basketball if they play so badly that my normal plays don't work against them? It's so stupid, right? Like, it's like the SWAT team. They train to raid places, and or like, let's say one of your special ops, like SEAL team, right? They train against each other. They use highly advanced tactics, right? Can you imagine one of the SEAL team members saying, well, I don't think our tactics are going to work on these clowns because they're too bad at gunfighting for our tactics to work? It would never be said in any other thing. It's completely unique to poker. There's something about the luck of the game that is real and does happen that screws people's heads up in a big way. So I'm telling you, get rid of that. That's so silly. It doesn't make any sense. Don't hide from the police in the middle of the police station. It's not sneaky, it's not tricky. You're not tricking anybody. You're doing something stupid. This idea that, you know, I should do something stupid because they'll never expect that I would do something stupid. Well, the reason that they wouldn't expect it is because it's fucking stupid, right? Don't do stupid things. Leveling turns into rock, paper, scissors at like level 3. Just stop with the leveling. I mean, I guess if you've really, I play a lot of heads-up poker, and leveling is just not a big part of my game. It comes up on occasion, but that's heads up, and that's, a pretty experienced player playing heads up against players that are playing mostly small stakes, right? I play never above 50, rarely at 20 these days, so mostly I'm playing NL10, NL5, even $1 games. And I still very, very rarely try to out-level my opponents. I just try to take good, sharp lines and adjust them based on the opponent mistake propensities as I see them. Leveling is kind of like playing rock, paper, scissors at a certain point. Not that there's no place for it, there is. But don't go overboard with it. And really, if you have to think about that or think about any other aspect of the game, you're probably better off investing your time thinking about literally any other facet of the game. So I guess that's going to do it. Navinat on No Limit Hold'em. Until next time, guys, good quote, L-U-C-K, end quote.